Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 127 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. So, a couple of episodes ago, I talked about thinking in monochrome and sort of was lamenting, or, well, maybe not lamenting, but certainly talking about the difference between the analog era where I knew that I had black and white film in the camera, or I knew that I had color film in the camera, and therefore I was limited to making photographs either in black and white and color or color. And now in the digital era, the sort of issue relative to photographing in color and black and white kind of all at the same time. The fact that our digital world allows us, or really, I guess, forces us to convert to monochrome imagery after we've made the photograph, and yet most of the time when we're looking at the photographs, we're looking at them in color. So, as you might suspect, a topic like that provoked a fair number of responses from listeners out there, and I'm always appreciative, by the way, of people who respond. I may not get back to you right away, but I try to get back to everybody as some sort of timely fashion. And I had some really interesting responses. And then one sort of spurious response of my own in a way. So let's sort of take them one at a time, and just things that I had not thought about, but obviously some listeners had thought about. So let's sort of run down a list here, or a short list of ideas about digital photography and monochrome or black and white image making. One of the ones that several different listeners responded with was the idea that in digital photography, with many cameras, not all of them, but many of them, we can shoot JPEG plus RAW. JPEG plus RAW. Now, I'm sure that most of us who are out there photographing with digital equipment shoot with RAW files most of the time because of the incredible latitude that extra bit depth and extra amount of information that the sensor can capture in the RAW file format can give to us. But I had not thought of the idea of JPEG plus RAW as a really interesting monochrome option. And that idea would be to set the camera to capture in monochrome, but of course the RAW file is always going to capture a full color image. So if we set the camera to capture in black and white or monochrome, the JPEG will be a monochrome file, allowing us to see the results of the picture as a black and white without making a conversion post-production. But the RAW file will enable us to either convert to black and white in any kind of RAW converter that we're using, or to leave the image in color. I thought that was a really clever idea. I guess maybe I'm just a little brain dead that I hadn't thought of it. I'd always sort of thought of JPEG plus RAW as being a kind of, well, something you don't need anymore with our modern RAW conversion tools, but here's a really terrific use for it. Again, setting the camera to capture in monochrome, the JPEGs will therefore be monochrome, but the RAW files will be able to be purposed either as monochrome pictures or as color pictures. Very clever, and I appreciate those of you who wrote to me about that idea. Others wrote, and boy, this is another one where I just feel kind of brain dead a little bit, because I hadn't really thought about this at all, and that is that many of the cameras that are now available with electronic viewfinders, some of the Micro Four Thirds cameras, or some of the other cameras that have electric viewfinders or electronic viewfinders that are not through the lens viewfinders, but rather are small LCD screens that either are integral to the camera or mounted in the camera's hot shoe, that those when you are looking at a picture and in the viewfinder and you have the camera set for monochrome, those viewfinders show the picture in monochrome. And boy, there's an interesting idea, something that we never had even back in the analog days with black and white film in the camera, the ability for the camera to actually show you what it is that the scene looks like in monochrome without having to resort to any kind of sort of technique of trying to imagine what the picture would look like in a monochrome rendition. Really interesting idea, and very interesting relative to the this sort of new era of cameras that have electronic viewfinders. So I found that one to be a really interesting idea as well, and thought that that was a very clever notion. And then, I'm cleaning out my office. We have to move in our building in the spring, at the end of the spring semester. So I'm cleaning out my office, and I found something that I had a long time ago and used a long time ago, but kind of stopped using over the years as I became more accustomed to monochrome photography, and that is a filter that allows me to momentarily hold it up to my eye and look through this filter, and it more or less replicates the monochrome photographic image by looking through a very dense kind of orangey filter. I remember that I received my first black and white viewing filter, believe it or not, when I was a student at the Ansel Adams workshop in 1983. And then I had another couple of them after that. I'm not even really sure where I got them. The Rat 90 was the brand that I had, but I see now on the B&H website that you can get a number of different kinds of filters, most of them by Tiffin, a couple of other manufacturers as well. And again, I'll put some links to these things. But for those of you who have a hard time imagining the world in monochrome, this is a terrific little tool. Your eye does get used to the color shift as you put this filter up to your eye, and you sort of have to look through it for a brief time and then take it away and look through it again for another brief time. But it does give you a better sense of what this colorful world of ours looks like when reduced to monochrome, and it seems to do a pretty good rendition of panchromatic film. So if you're trying to teach yourself how to see in black and white, this might be a really interesting tool to try out. And of course, the sort of poor man's alternative to this, and without having to actually go out and buy one of these filters, would be to simply squint. It turns out that as we squint our eyes, as profoundly as we can and still see, that the color of the world tends to drop away at least a little bit, and we can more accurately preview the world in a monochrome way without really being as influenced by the color of the world. So these are some really interesting ideas, both the combination of some old school ideas relative to the world of analog photography, but some really interesting new things with digital technologies and the way we can see and the way that affects how we perceive the kinds of photographs we might be making. And of course, the longer I think the longer one makes black and white photographs, the longer or the better somebody gets at trying to figure out what it is that the world looks like best as a monochrome image. And I think the more we do it, the better off we are. And I also think, and I'll include a couple of examples both in the Camera Position blog post, but also in the app extra, the PDF that comes along with the app, include some examples of the things that I look for when I'm looking for monochromatic or black and white photography. And a lot of times I'm really looking for a juxtaposition of light value against dark. Because for me, at least for my eye, for my sensibilities of what I like to include in black and white photographs, it is that abrupt tonal jump between a white object and something that is very dark or quite dark in the photograph. And it's that line of demarcation that I particularly like, and the idea that shadow becomes such an important part then of a black and white photograph, along with a pristine, beautiful highlight. So a little bit of follow-up on this monochrome versus color imagery and the digital era and how the digital era impacts monochrome photography. I also want to remind everybody about Camera Position's new Facebook page. I'm hoping that you'll get over there and like that page. And what I've done is I've put together a Facebook page for both of my podcasts, the History of Photography podcast and Camera Position, and have all of that activity located in one particular spot. So go on over to Facebook and find Jeff Curto's podcast page, and and I'll include a link to that in the blog and also in the Camera Position app extra, the PDF. And hopefully we'll get some good discussions going there. It's been a little quiet so far, but please feel free to drop any notes in there and see what we can find out from each other, in addition to being listeners to the podcast. I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.